What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Florida Gators are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Florida did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Florida. My projection, of course, for them was 5-7, and then my prediction for them was 7-5. So the difference between my projection and prediction on this Florida team last year, basically the projection was based off of how tough the schedule was, obviously, and that's the reason why you saw their projection record was at 5-7, and that was kind of based off of what they did in 2023 as well. But yeah, my prediction did change for this team at 7-5, and that's exactly what Florida did. A lot of people were not high on this Florida team last year. A lot of people kind of predicted them to, not even come close to making it into a bowl game last year, either going maybe 3-9 or maybe 4-8 or 5-7 at best. But this team went 7-5. They finished as one of the hottest teams in the country last year, maybe one of two. You count Michigan in there, but this was another hot team that finished pretty well down the stretch. And they went 8-5 overall if you count their bowl game victory at the end of the season. So a really good season last year for Florida just because of the schedule. That's the reason why I think it was a great season for the Gators. And really the first good season under Billy Napier. You look at the schedule from last year. First off, you look at who they played in the non-conference. They, of course, had to play both Miami and Florida State on the road, both out of the ACC. They play Florida State every year, which that really is not a surprise, but yeah, Miami was a big non-conference game, but you look back at that game, that was not even a close game at all, and obviously we thought Florida was going to be not really good for the rest of the year, based off of what they did in that game. But then they had a freshman, DJ Lagway, come in there, and it played extremely well. But then the other non-conference games, they played Samford, pretty much the only easy game on there, and then UCF, but UCF and Florida State ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be. I expected UCF to kind of be a dark horse team in the Big 12 last year, and then Florida State obviously the top team in the ACC. But that obviously did not happen there for both of these teams. And then you take a look at the SEC schedule for the Gators. They played Texas A&M at home. They also played Kentucky, LSU, and Ole Miss all at home last year. So 4 home games in the SEC. And then their road schedule, they played Mississippi State, at Tennessee, and then at Texas. So that was their true road games there. And then they had that one neutral site game against Georgia. They lost to Miami, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Georgia, and Texas. The Texas game wasn't really close. The Texas A&M game was kind of ugly for Florida, but Tennessee game was pretty close, and so was the Georgia game. So they were competitive against Tennessee and Georgia, two teams that were, made the college football playoff last year. And again, with this schedule, with one of the toughest schedules in the country, Florida was able to go 7-5 last year in the regular season with this schedule. Let's now look ahead to 2025. The schedule is kind of the same like in the SEC, but it's not really the same in the non-conference. Let's take a look at who they play in the non-conference first before we go game by game. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will play LIU, USF, which is known as South Florida, and then they play Miami this time on the road. So they will play the Hurricanes in back-to-back years, but this time they will play them on the road, but it's going to be in a much different date compared to last year. Last year was the season opener, but this time they will play them in week 4, and then they obviously play Florida State. So they play Florida State every year because of that rivalry. The non-conference schedule, though, when you look at it, it's not too tough of a non-conference schedule compared to last year. Miami and Florida State are going to be pretty tough games, but, South Florida, that's a group of 5 team. They've been pretty good in the last couple years against SEC teams, so maybe that's not really going to be an easy win there for Florida, but it's a game they probably should be able to take care of business in. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now take a look at the home schedule, and again, they play 3 home games in the SEC because of that neutral site game against Georgia. They will play Texas, Mississippi State, and Tennessee all at home in the SEC this year. So I think you like to have that home schedule there with Texas and Tennessee both at home. Obviously, you got blown out by Texas last year. I mean, there's a lot of hype for Texas, but, Florida obviously has a chance to probably, maybe pull off the upset. You never know about Florida. They could probably pull off the upset because it's at home for them, and it's a very tough place to play in the Swamp. And then Tennessee obviously has struggled against Florida in the Swamp. I mean, this rivalry here between these two teams has gone back and forth. You know, Billy Napier has had a lot of success against Tennessee. You know, he's beaten them a couple of times, and then Tennessee's beaten a couple of times of them back. So, yeah, this rivalry has been close ever since, you know, Josh Heupel and Billy Napier took over both of these programs. And then obviously Mississippi State's pretty much the only easy home game on this schedule. So, yeah, that's your home schedule. Let's now move on to the away schedule. And before I start the true away schedule, that Georgia game is not really counted as an away game, but it's on a neutral site field, so that's like away from home. But then on their road schedule, they play LSU, Texas A&M, Kentucky, and Ole Miss, so some pretty tough road games here. LSU and Texas A&M and Ole Miss are pretty tough places to play, and then obviously Kentucky is a pretty big trap game. Kentucky wasn't good last year, but, you know, Florida beat them pretty easily, but it seems like it's always a trap game when Florida does play in Lexington against Kentucky. So that's your away schedule. It's pretty tough. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for the Gators. They kick things off with LIU on August 30th, and after that it's USF on September the 6th. So a couple of cupcakes there, and then they play LSU to open up SEC play, I should say, on September the 13th. And then how about this? They'll go back on the road to play against a non-conference opponent in Miami on September 20th. And like I mentioned, this game is, you know, in week 4 this year instead of week 1. And yeah, how about that? Back-to-back road games with LSU and Miami in the SEC and then in the non-conference. Yeah, that's going to be pretty brutal there for Florida. That's going to be a pretty tough stretch. And then they get a bye week here. Actually had a really good time. You like to have this bye week here for the Gators. They play Texas coming out of the bye week on October 4th. That'll be a home game. That'll be a pretty exciting game there for Florida. And then they go on the road to play Texas A&M on October the 11th. Then they'll come back at home for Mississippi State on October the 18th. And then they get their second bye week, obviously, before playing Georgia in Jacksonville on November 1st. Then it's on the road at Kentucky on November 8th. Then on the road at Ole Miss on November 15th. So you got your second back-to-back road games here, but it's in the SEC this time. Kentucky and Ole Miss. And then you play Tennessee at home on November 22nd. And then they close things out at home as well against Florida State on November 29th. So it's another brutal schedule here for Florida. I mean, basically you have to go on the road to play Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Miami, and LSU. Yeah, those are going to be all tricky games on the road. And then you got Georgia, obviously, which you play every year. That is always brutal. And then you got Texas. Yeah, this is just another brutal schedule for Florida in 2025. I don't know if it's one of the toughest schedules in the country, but as of right now, I think it is for 2025. So let's now get a projection here for Florida. This is the scale I'll be using here for their projection. Basically, if it's a red game in the 1% category, that's pretty much an automatic loss. And then your 20% games in the orange, those are games where Florida will be about a double-digit underdog. 40% games in the yellow, they'll be a clear underdog in that percentage by 6 or 7 points. So by about a touchdown, and then your 50-50 games will stay in the white. Those are games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games in the purple, those are games where Florida will be favored by about a touchdown or like 6 or 7 points. And then obviously 80% games in the blue, those are counted as wins, but they're going to be favored by double digits in that percentage. And then 99% games in the green, that's pretty much your automatic wins. It's not just like the blue games, it's pretty much your automatic wins. So you look at this schedule and you're probably thinking, where are the easy wins at for Florida? Well, you got a couple of them on here at least, and that's LIU and USF. So I think they'll be obviously a big favorite against LIU. At least they don't have to play a Power 4 team there, to open up the season, which I think is really good news for the Gators. And a couple of cupcakes to kind of, figure out what this Florida team is going to look like. So, yeah, I think that LIU game is definitely over that 95 to 99% mark. And then South Florida, maybe you could put that game at 90 to like 94% because South Florida is not a bad group of 5 team. But I expect Florida to really, be able to take care of business in both of these games. So that's your automatic wins. And then we go to the blue games. I actually have one blue game on here, and that's also counted as a slight win. It's not really automatic just like the green games are, but it's still counted as a win either way. And Mississippi State here on October 18th, because the game is at home, that's the reason why it turns into a blue game instead of like a purple game. It would be a purple game if it was on the road, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the blue for right now. And I think the Gators will be favored here by double digits against the Bulldogs, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. And then you go to the purple games. I have a couple of purple games on here for Florida. I think they'll be favored by 6 or 7 against both of these opponents. Kentucky and Florida State. I get it, Florida State's a rivalry game. It should be a 50-50 game. If it was on the road at Tallahassee, I would probably put that one in the white for right now. But Kentucky, obviously, I mean, that's a pretty tough one. You know, that's a trap game in my opinion for Florida. But I think the Gators are probably the more talented team. And Kentucky, you never know. They could probably turn things around this year. And plus, this game is in the month of November. Usually we see Kentucky and Florida play earlier in the year. But this time it's in the month of November. So Kentucky, whether they're good or not, they could be probably better by this time. So yeah, Kentucky, definitely a purple game in my opinion here for Florida. And then I got a couple of games on here where I think the Gators are going to be underdogs in. They're not going to be a red or orange type of underdog, though, in that 1% and 20% range. Both of those games come in the yellow at 40%, and that's Texas and Georgia. I think both of these games, Florida will be about a 6 or 7 point underdog. Obviously, Texas is the more talented team. That's the reason why it's in the yellow. I mean, obviously, Georgia is pretty tough to play every year, and I know the game was close last year, but Georgia's pretty much dominated this series as of late. That's the reason why it's in the yellow, and then obviously Texas game was not really close, but I think it could be a closer game this year because DJ Lagway was not healthy by that time when they went into Austin, so if DJ Lagway was healthy, you know, for Georgia and Texas, they probably would have won both of these games last year either way. I think, you know, Florida will be a big underdog in both of these games by 6 or 7 points, like a heavy underdog by 6 or 7 points, so by about a touchdown. And then I got 5 50-50 games on here for Florida. LSU, Miami, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. I think these are all games that really could go either way, so my best guess is they probably win like 2 of these 5 50-50 games because some of these 50-50 games are going to be extremely tough. And then you got these, 2 yellow games. Maybe they're somehow to pull off the upset. You never know. But my best guess is they probably can win, 2 out of these 5 50-50 games. So when you average everything out as we get a projected record here, this was a very tough projection here for Florida just based off of how very, very tough this schedule is. But we count the green games as wins. That one blue game is a win. Then you average out a couple of those purple games at 60%, average out the 40% games in the yellow at 40%, then average out all these 5 50-50 games at 50%. The overall projected record based on this schedule comes out to 7-5. So I get it. It could be 5-7 because of how tough the schedule is, but based off of how Florida did last year, that's the reason why the projection came at 7-5. Because if they were not had a good season last year, Florida probably would be underdogs in almost every single one of these games on the schedule. But it does come out to 7-5. Again, it's a pretty tough schedule, but Florida obviously made some progress last year, and they could be favored in some of these games, and then sometimes they could be underdogs as well. But yeah, 7-5 is what I got here for Florida. It's not really like a confident projection by myself, but I think 8-4 probably the best case, and then 6-6 probably the worst case. I think 5-7, if they do worse than that, it probably won't be a disappointment just because of how tough this schedule is. But either way, 7-5 is what the projected record is for Florida for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? And also give me your thoughts about Florida's schedule down in the comments below. Is it tough or not so tough? I'll go ahead and say it though, it is a very tough schedule for Florida. Thanks for watching this video though, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.